How's it going, everyone? Today we're going to be breaking down 5 different tips for wave control. And I've chosen some that I don't really see used very often, but they can be extremely effective when used in the right situation. So we're going to be going through the best time to use each one, some examples, and all the details that you need to know. So if you feel like you want to be adding a couple new weapons to your wave control, then let's get started. So we're going to be starting with the example before we break it down into details for each point. And our first tip is going to be what to do when you're playing up against a split map, but you're in a matchup where you need to trade. So in this game here, I'm playing Ignite Fiora versus Irelia. You can't pick a more volatile matchup than that, but we have a split map. And for those of you who don't know, a split map is when both junglers are vertical jungling. So maybe the enemy jungler is eating your red, and your jungler has to eat the enemy red in response, which means the enemy jungler is going to be topside for around 4 minutes. They're going to eat all the top camps from both sides of the jungle and the top crab, so it can be really hard to play out your lane, especially if you're in a volatile matchup. However, in this game, if you're up against Irelia, if I let her push me in and she abuses 4 stacks of her passive, level 2 versus 1, level 3 versus 2, and I take even one bad trade, not only could I get dived by Viego Irelia, but she could just base and TP back with item advantage, HP advantage, and the lane's going to be very unplayable for me. So the way to counteract this with wave control is to look for a 2-wave crash. And I like this example here, because I'm not playing a champion like Olaf or Renekton that can one-shot the wave. I'm playing Fiora, who has pretty terrible wave clear. But I know that if I don't push here, my lane is completely over, and even though it's a split map, I need to do my best, and the best way to do it is to 2-wave crash, because if I try to 3-wave crash, the Viego is going to finish all 3 camps and look to gank me before I'm done, and it's pretty much unplayable for me, Aurelia can just freeze forever. So instead of that, right after this trade here, I'm going to be looking to push this wave in as fast as I can, and go for a 2-wave crash. So I actually should have prioritized the wave control here. Looking back at it, I was a little bit sloppy here, but you can see the end result's still great. I got the 2-wave crash in here, and right as Viego's looking to gank me from Try, as we can see on the map, he's level 3, 12 CS, but I'm able to avoid that gank because I don't have to get my wave in. And now, even though he's going to be killing blue camps and top crab, and he might look to gank me again, the wave is coming back towards me. So it's very easy for me to respect him because I don't have to walk up for CS that deep. I don't have to try to awkwardly get a crash in, anything like that. So it's going to be a lot easier for me to play. So you can see, I'll skip ahead a little bit. I can still trade onto it. Also knows I'm leaning on the top side of the map. So it's very hard for him to gank me. And now that the wave is in this position, I can play the lane exactly how I wanted to coming into the game before that split map. So even though I wanted to 3-wave crash in this lane, I adapted because it was a split map. I didn't adapt in the way where most people would, where they just play safe and respect jungle. I was able to 2-wave crash, let the wave come back into me while trading, and still kill her on the bounce back just like this. Now, to break this down in a little bit more detail, the best scenarios to use it is, of course, the split map situation that we just reviewed and a matchup where you can get pro, but also if they have really high kill threat. So champs like Renekton Talia, Camille Rek'Sai, Jack Shaco, where they've got a stun. Shaco has a really fast 3 camp. Champs like Belveth can kill 3 camps really quickly in gank top, especially if you're on blue side. So the reason why blue side is way more dangerous for a top laner. It's not just because of counterpick from the enemy, but also the enemy jungler can do raptors, red golems, or any combination of those 3 and gank you afterwards. It can be really hard for you to survive that because they're going to gank around 235, which is before you crash wave 3. So if you're going through a 3-wave crash, they can kill you before you get that in, or at the very least clear your ward and pressure you and make it really hard for you to breathe. So to give a good example, let's say you're playing Riven versus Renekton. I know you probably should have been Renekton, pretty tricky matchup, but you actually win the level 1. So if you can abuse your strong level 1, and get push. You can abuse level 2 versus 1. You can actually get an early advantage against that matchup if the Renekton makes a couple mistakes. But if you just let him push you in because you're scared of the jungler, you're not going to get that opportunity. But if you 2-wave crash instead of 3, you can completely avoid that jungle timing and still play to win your matchup. So not only will you avoid that gank timing, as we just saw in that example, you'll be abusing your strong early game, you'll be avoiding giving them the opportunity to beat you up early game, and you can't get dived even if you're completely on weak side, because it's going to take so long after you 2-wave crash for the wave to come back towards you for that dive timer that the jungler's just going to waste so much time. Now, for tip number 2, this one is a little bit harder to explain, but I'll definitely do my best. There are matchups that you're going to play where your opponent can get pro up against you, but if you play the trades and the wave control well enough, they can't actually crash wave 3, so you can actually end the lane completely at 2 minutes 30 before they can even crash wave 3. So some champions that come to mind, champs like Vladimir, champs like Rumble, Aurora, even champs like Teemo, where you can constantly trade onto your opponent, but you don't have to get pro in certain matchups. So in this example here, Vladimir up against Jax, he can get prior if he wants by abusing his passive and queuing onto me. And you can see I didn't even play the level 1 that well. I queued a minion for some reason. He can get prior if he wants, but as long as I play the trades and the wave control well enough, he can't crash wave 3, so he can have his lane completely over so early on into the game. So you can see I'm mainly playing to poke him down, not take too much damage myself, space him out, poke him, and also trim the wave. So just like in the 3-wave crash guide, we talk about doing slightly more damage than your opponent if you want a 3-wave crash. If you want to block your opponent from doing so, you want to be doing slightly less damage than your opponent to let them push you in while balancing trading in between. So here I got to respect level 2 vs 1, of course, unless he does that. So I'm able to constantly poke him down, and now that I've got my W up, he won't be able to get the wave in. So even if he didn't take that tower shot there, he still can't get this wave in. I can still trade onto him and make it difficult for him to crash wave 3. And now wave 3's here. He wants to be getting this wave in as fast as he can. But you can see, because of the nature of the matchup, I can poke him down. I even pop Ignite here, not even for the kill, just for the trade. And now his lane is completely over. He could base in TP for a refillable if he wants, but his wave is frozen at 2 minutes 40. You can see I'm just blocking him from reaching the wave here. But he's got his E up and my W's down now, so I'm going to be respecting for a little bit. But you can see it's pretty much unplayable for him to crash the wave. And I ping my jungler to come, but she's not going to come. I don't need her to. I need to be trimming this wave a bit more and block him from crashing a wave at all. So he's trying to force this wave in really heavily, you can see, but completely unplayable for him. So now I just go for the all-in, and even if he didn't die here, let's imagine he will jumped away, he had a bit more mana, he would still be completely screwed. He could base for a refillable, but he'll just come back on the same freeze, down so much XP, and his lane is going to be completely over at around 2:33 minutes into the game. Now, as for when the best time is to use this strategy, I'll say out of the 5 wave control tips I've got prepared today, this one is the hardest to know when or when you shouldn't be doing it. It's dependent not just on your champion mastery, the understanding of the matchup, but also the mistakes your opponent is making as well. There might be some matchups where on paper, if your opponent plays normally, you can't do it, but because they make some mistakes with their wave or the trades, you can actually do this to them and end their lane extremely early. But the champions that you can head into a lane doing it on are champions where you can short trade and also have a relatively strong all-in. So champions like Rumble, I'd say Rumble's the top dog at this. He's really good at short trading with E without destroying the wave. But champions like Vlad and Aurora can do it too. But I've also seen it done consistently on melee champions like Fiora, champs like Cassante, where you can short trade them. And if the trades go well enough, you can look to kill them or keep the wave frozen outside the tower very early on to the game, and they can't crash the wave, which their lane is going to be completely over, where I see a lot of players defaulting to getting prior if they can, because prior is of course really good in the majority of your matchups, but there are some lanes where you can win short trades so frequently that they won't be able to crash their wave if they push it or if they hit the wave randomly and you get a good trade and you see an opportunity to let the wave come to you. You can get a massive advantage so early on to the game, where also not only did you win your lane so early, maybe making the base for a refillable potion, the TP of shame, or just die on that freeze, but you're pretty much invulnerable to ganks, where if you are looking to 3-wave crash and play really aggressive, even if you have a good level 1 board, if the enemy jungler is creative, you might be able to get punished. So a lot of the time, if you're in a matchup where you can, you see your opponent get pro, like start to push the wave, but they can't win trades against you, you can implement the strategy and hard punish them so early on into the game. Moving on to our next point, and this is for the situation that you might have found yourself in before, where you're stuck under your tower, but you want to base and TP back to lane without losing anything, but your opponent just keeps shoving waves under tower, making it really hard for you to do so. And you've probably heard the tip before, where you want to be basing and TPing back after clearing the wave before cannon wave. And that is really great advice. If you can clear the 6 minion wave, the 6 minions that had crashed under your tower, and then instantly base and TP back as the cannon is coming in, they're not going to be able to get that cannon under your tower. But what do you do if your opponent's playing a little bit better than that? They're not just mindlessly pushing one wave at a time, they're trying to build 2 waves together, just like this Jax is doing. And the way to counteract that is clear the melee minions, hit like I'm doing so here, and then base and TP back, leaving the casters alive. Now here he knows he has to make a choice. If he lets the wave come back towards him, I'll base and TP back. It may lose, maybe even just lose 1 or 2 tops. Caster minions, come back, and I can completely shit on him, and he's not going to be able to base himself. Or he can try to crash this wave in, but because it is a cannon wave, it's very hard for him to do so, even if he is playing a champion with great wave clear. So now I can base and TP back, and look, we've got a nice freeze, so we have the item advantage, the resource advantage, with a freeze. So we went from being in a situation that's pretty much unplayable to being able to completely shit on this guy just from our back timing. And if you do versus a worse opponent and all he does is just crash minions under your tower, you can take the easy way, just kill 6 minions based on TP on the wave before cannon. But if you are against an opponent that's stacking waves together and playing it a bit better, kill the 3 melee minions that you can kill from safely under your tower, back and base and TP straight back, and then you can abuse either your freeze or you can push in your opponent, and now the tables have turned and you can block them from basing themselves. So we did break this down in a lot of detail during that example, but to expand on it a little bit more, if your opponent is just mindlessly crashing waves, then yeah, just kill the 6 minions that are under your tower, and based on the wave before cannon, TP back, you're not really going to miss anything, even though you could walk back as well if you don't have TP, base and walk back, same thing. But if your opponent is making it really hard, he's not just mindlessly crashing, this can be a great tip for you to use, just clear the melees that you can kill from safely under your tower, base and TP back. Now, if you do base and walk back after doing that, you will lose a little bit, but you're going to lose not as much as you could if you base on a different timer. And there are some situations that you might find yourself in. Maybe you're in a hard matchup, maybe there's jungle gap that you do just need a base and walk back, or you are going to get dove by the jungler, or maybe even 1v1. And if you can clear half of the waves, so the 3 melees on the way before cannon, and run back, most of the time, especially if you have tier 2 boots, you're not going to miss that much in the early game compared to if you just got stuck under tower before you died, or if you based on a different timer than this. So knowing this trick can help you lose as little as possible when you're in a painful situation without TP, but also completely turn your lane around if you do have TP. Moving on to number 4, and this one is mainly based around gaining yourself a freeze, but you're a little bit late to lane. You're not able to trim and do everything necessary, so maybe you just walk back to lane or you TP'd back like in this example. The way to gain a freeze after your opponent has killed your wave is to pull the wave as high up as you can. So I'll show an example here of me doing it in a real game versus a real opponent, and then we'll mess around in training to a little bit. But you can see here, I just TP back to lane versus a Gragas, so counter matchup, and he wants to match my base now. He wants to get his 300 HP back, get his lost chapter, whatever he wants to buy, and come back to lane and start beating me up. But instead of me just letting him do that, you can see here, I'm trying to pull the wave up, and here I'm trying to trim a little bit, making it really annoying and tricky for him to base. So after he walks away to go and ward, I ward to base actually, and maybe ward as well. I'm pulling the wave up. If he didn't stop me, I would have gone all the way up to the second bush, but he came here, so I just pulled him to here, and you can see I've pulled the wave away from my tower in time for my next wave to arrive, even though he didn't really make a mistake. He crashed his wave very quickly. As you can see, the next wave coming is all the way behind tier 2. But because I was able to pull the wave up like this, I completely blocked his recall. And I was able to keep us on relatively even items, where if he came back, with the wave bouncing back towards him, it'd be really hard for me to play. So not only am I safe to ganks right now, but our items are relatively similar. So I can play out my lane very normally. And if you can see, the lane extended for a very long time, and I constantly made it hard for him to crash a wave. I kept trimming because I'm actually in the lane now, where before I had to base and TP back. I'm actually in the lane now. I can trim, I can keep making it hard for him, and eventually my Nidalee realizes and comes up for this punish. You'll see very shortly here, he kills this last minion. I go for this trade here, trim the wave, and now he's just completely stuck here. Even if my Nidalee didn't come, look where my next wave is, behind tier 1. I'm going to have a freeze here again, so making it so painful and so tricky for him to base through pulling my wave all the way up there, where if I just let my wave settle just outside of tower, it wouldn't have even been a freeze for him to stop his recall for. It would have been a slow push, so he would have been able to base very freely. So I'll quickly show an example in training 2 of what you can do with pulling the wave in the scenario where your opponent's not in lane. So maybe you just made it back to lane after he based or roamed with a big stack wave coming towards you, or you solo killed him and the wave's too big to handle. The way you want to be able to manipulate it so you can maintain your freeze is pulling it all the way up to tier 2 bush like this and then letting it drop, walking back towards your lane. So the reason this is better than just freezing it in front of your mid tower around here is that will not be a permanent freeze. But if you pull it up like this and you trim it correctly, you can base and walk back to lane if you need to, especially after solo killing your opponent, or if you just made it back to lane, you can trim the wave, keep it here, it'll deny an entire wave, where sometimes if you try to hard push, you're not going to crash the wave in time without them losing anything, but if you hold the freeze like this, it's going to eat the minions very, very quickly, so they're going to lose a lot even just from a clean crash base by them. If you pull the wave up to tier 2, they can still lose an entire wave of XP. So to expand on this tip, the main benefit to doing this, instead of just blocking it from outside of your tower, is that's not going to be a permanent freeze. If the minions are just outside your tower range, it's not going to freeze for an extended period of time, but if you pull it all the way up, you can have a perma-freeze and freeze for a really long time, maybe even deny 20, 30 CS, depending on the game state. It can be really hard for your opponent to play, but you can also guarantee yourself a higher tempo recall. So if you want to base on your freeze, that's going to be really great for you, but if you freeze outside of your tower, you have to wait for the minions to approach all the way to your tower, or you have to wait for your minions to actually make it back to lane in time. Or if you pull the wave up to tier 2 or tier 3 and you might need to practice the timing a little bit, you can base in that second bush or that third bush, let the minion wave start walking towards your tower, but if you time it correctly, it's going to be blocked right outside of your tower range, or a little bit higher I would hope, so you can have a permanent freeze, so you can get a high tempo recall, come back to lane, and your freeze is already nicely set up for you. Now the downside to this that you do need to watch out for, is you are going to take a bit more damage. Of course you have to pull the wave all the way up, you're going to be tanking it a lot, but you can go in and out of the bush to stop it from moving momentarily, so you can juggle the minion aggro a little bit. But I'd say the fact that you can guarantee a freeze or a high tempo recall from doing this, or as we saw in the example versus Gragas, make your opponent really feel pressured that they can't base themselves, because even though that Gragas did stop his base to stay in the lane, if he was in worse condition, he would have had to base anyway, and he's basing on my freeze, he's going to lose a lot more than if he based with on my slow push or if he based after a crash. So not only can you put pressure on them to stop recall, but it's a guaranteed advantage either way. Moving on to our final tip, and this one is the most important by far, and one that you can do in the majority of your matchups, and that is blocking the wave. And blocking the wave is essentially letting the melee minions and cannon reach your tower and die to the tower, but you're standing in a position under the tower, so the enemy melee champion can't hit you, but the caster minions are hitting you so they stop in their tracks and they won't hit the tower. So you'll see very shortly in this example, the Fiora, if she bases right now, and I let the wave crash, it'll bounce back towards her, she'll come back full HP with item, and I won't be able to base myself, my game will be completely screwed. I'm pretty much going to die or get ganked on that timer, and there's nothing I can do. But if I block the wave here, as you'll see very shortly, I let the melees hit tower, and I block her right now and stop her from reaching the tower. So I block her with Jaxi, the champions that are best, and we'll go through it in a bit more detail, champs with a shield or a way to block the damage. But you can see, the reason I can't pull the wave up for a permanent freeze like I did in the previous tip, is because Fiora's in that bush, she will beat the shit out of me, so it's better for me to block the wave and put pressure on her. If she bases right now, she technically could, but she'll lose a lot from this slow push here. She'll lose an entire wave just from me blocking it, so I'll have a pretty good XP advantage over her. So she feels pressured to stay, and now she's in a position where she has to try to force a wave in, but her custom minions are under the tower, as we can see now. So not only is she very gankable, like we'll see very shortly, but it's really hard for her to crash this wave at all. So I can keep the wave on my side of the lane for a very long period of time and maybe even block the next wave if she tries to crash it. But a huge benefit of it is she is going to be gankable, so Graves just rocks up, has a little fight with her, and initially I thought this is not even a kill, I'm just going to use the free time to get my wave in, but Fiora went for the mechanics max, so I was able to pick up a nice kill, but most importantly now I've got myself a recall, so I went from an unplayable position to a position where I'm in a really good spot based purely from me blocking the wave. Now, I'll also show an example of this done against me, but also the way to play against it if somebody does that to you. So in this game here, I'm playing Jax against Cassante, we just killed him with a gank, but now he TP's back. I'm not strong enough to get this wave under tower, he just TP'd back, he's way stronger than me. If I try, he's just going to Cassante me under the tower, so I just need a base. I need to accept a small loss and give up 3 caster minions and base here, and however, you can see very shortly, he lets the wave die, but he's letting the melees and the cannon reach tower, so that they die to the tower, and then he can pull up these. So just like our previous tip, he doesn't just leave the wave here, because then he'll know it comes back towards me, and he won't have that Cassante freeze that you want to be having. He pulls the wave really high up, out of away from the tower, so now he can permanently freeze this wave. So what do you do against this? So the counterplay to it is to make your opponent break the wave by fighting him, because I can't get this wave in, I'm not strong enough, this is not a Jack's favorite matchup these days, very good for Cassante, so I just need to fight him. I'm making him hit me, I'm making him cue the wave, I'm making him auto me, you'll see very shortly, and I'm just trying to soak XP. I have to give up the casters, but you can see I'm making him fight me here, the minions are turning onto him, the minions are doing damage to him, not the wave, which means the wave is going to be bouncing back towards me, just forcing a heavy trade that makes him annoy the minion wave, and eventually, after slowly, painfully trying to make him fight you for a long time, the wave will bounce back towards you, just like in this game here. So it's not pretty, but it's the only way you can kind of get yourself out of that position if you're not strong enough to just brute force crash the wave. So to expand on this point a little bit more, even though this tip isn't completely unknown by any means, if you're a high ranked player, maybe even Emerald and above, you probably do it yourself. The extent in which it's done is completely different when you verse a higher ranked Korean player. It wasn't until I came to Korean solo queue that I realized just how many opportunities I was missing to block the wave. But the majority of the time where I see the wave being blocked is because your opponent does something completely horrible with the wave. They crash wave 3 way too slowly, so it's very easy. You can block the wave for just a couple seconds, and you can block the casters from reaching tower, or maybe even your wave blocks it yourself. However, being able to consistently do it when your opponent's not making a mistake is what separates this tip from what you're probably used to being seeing in your games. If your opponent crashes the last wave very quickly, but you're playing certain champions, you can block it every time. If you're playing a Cassante or a Poppy, Mordekaiser, champs with shields, champion like Jax, where you can block it with your E, you can completely block the wave even though they crash their last wave very quickly. You can just hold it there for 20 seconds and block the majority of that damage, and even though you will get chunked, the wave is now in a position where they can't recall very easily, and the wave is going to be stuck outside your tower. Very easy to get ganks, very easy to trade, so very hard for them to do anything, even though you will take a little bit of damage. If you're playing a champion, they can block that damage, so if you have any form of sustain or shielding, you can completely make it impossible for your opponent to base whatsoever. But if you're playing a champion that doesn't have that, let's say you're playing Camille or Fiora, you're not going to be able to do it as much as a champion like Cassante, of course, but you can still do it if your opponent doesn't crash their wave very cleanly. So let's say you're playing Fiora versus Camille, they don't really have good wave clear, they're trying to crash a wave onto you. You can block the wave for maybe 5-10 seconds depending on where the wave is. So make sure you check on your map, see how far away your wave is, and decide if you're going to take too much damage from blocking it. So if your opponent's playing extremely well, crashing waves very quickly, playing champions with good wave clear, you need to be a champion with a shield or some sort of sustain to block the wave from for indefinitely. But if you're playing a different matchup, maybe you don't have that tool in your kit. If your opponent doesn't crash the wave perfectly, you can still block it, because if they crash it too slowly, doesn't matter how far away your wave is. I guess it does matter as long as your wave is between tier 1 and tier 2, I should say. You will be able to block it regardless of your matchup, so that can make it extremely difficult for your opponent to ever get a recall and ever let the wave bounce back towards them. Alright everyone, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I know I don't normally make videos with these types of formats, but I did want to make another wave control video covering some points that I missed on my wave control guide, so I hope you gained some value nonetheless, and if you enjoyed it, feel free to let me know down below what you'd like to see me cover next, and I'll see you all next time.